Jean-Pierre Sauvage, Frenchman, that started making some little wheels out of atoms. Overall picture for all humanity, over 4,900 quadrillion correct atoms per second just to replace our red blood cells. At that point, that the theory of evolution as the origin and cause of life is now factually falsified. And he's called God because it takes this incredible mind that is so far.
We're hopping into his textbook here, and this is Darwin's Replacement. And you open up this book early on talking about the work of the James Tour group and then 3 Nobel Prize winners in chemistry. Both these groups have worked on simple molecular machines. So just tell me about as much of that as you can, and then how these groups actually are revealing, whether intentionally or not, that man does not have the intelligence to build complex molecular machines. And then for context, just lay out what that means, complex molecular machines too.
Okay. So James Tour is a bit of a fan of ours in atomic biology. He's an absolute brilliant genius, works out of Rice University in Texas. He is one that picked up on what the 3 Nobel Prize winners in chemistry 2016 had got the prize for. So he picked up on what they had done and made it better, actually. They worked for 33 years to build a molecular machine. And they started, I believe it was Jean-Pierre Sauvage, Frenchman, that started making some little wheels out of atoms, okay? And he managed to make a little axle for the wheels to be on. And between Stoddard and Feringa, they made this into a little chassis, and Feringa was the one that made a little motor to drive it. Now, they didn't give all the details in the information I've read of how they did it, but James Tour filled me in on what it takes to build a molecular machine. You have to work on a solid gold surface at around 225 to 275 degrees centigrade. These things that they make can be moved with ultraviolet light to stimulate and move them. They now have annual races between the groups that have made some molecular machines. Okay, so I think they go about a meter in around 4 hours. Okay, so
you said they have to. Sorry to interrupt. You said they have to make these machines on solid gold surfaces.
That's what Tour claims. That's what he has to do with his, and so it's very complex. It took the first one. It took the Nobel Prize winners 33 years to get one, and of course, it's not alive. And it's, I call, ultimately more simple than the simplest of the molecular machines made inside of us every day of the week. Okay, so just as a comparison for the two, and so. Yeah, like I say, they have their little races for these little molecular machines now, but they're nowhere near being alive. And like I say, they can be made to move with ultraviolet light, but that's not real life. So
and these are very smart chemists doing this.
Oh yeah, brilliant. You should look up Tour and some of his inventions.
I am a bit familiar with James Tour. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, brilliant individual.
Yeah.
And yeah. So he found out about our atomic biology, and I met him at a conference in San Diego some years ago, and he told me he liked what we were doing, and it's just got better since. But part of it is based on this situation where it takes so much intelligence to
Hmm.
build even an unliving molecular machine or cell. And so the next really convincing proof, Caleb, was that uh, over the last 70 plus years, other scientists have been trying to make a living cell out of elements. Can't come anywhere close. And that tells us that it takes far more intelligence than man has to make a living cell. And we know that the Darwinian claim is that it doesn't take any, it just takes evolution, and that does it all. Well, that is now factually falsified. So we want to make that point that the theory of evolution as the origin and cause of life is now factually falsified. It doesn't work. It doesn't have the super intelligence far above mankind's level that's essential to build living cell parts and cells, including us. Okay?
And it would also, it's just while you were talking and some things you mentioned here, not only the intelligence but the conditions, right? I think that's something that James Tour gets into. But even so, if they are using a lot of intelligence, a lot of intelligent machinery, processes, and then also needing to do it on a solid gold surface, it would be my understanding that early Earth would not have a solid gold surface too. Just worth throwing out there.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Yes, no, God doesn't need that. He,
Yeah. So
his intelligence is so far above ours. And the more I studied this life science that we've developed, atomic biology, the more absolutely blown away I am by what God can do. And
and while you don't have your doctorate, you have put in like 1,000 hours or 10,000 hours in 40
well,
years in credits, or I'm probably getting those numbers wrong, but substantial about education.
I will say that my co-author, Dr. Jerry Bergman, is probably the most highly educated scientist in North America. Anyway, he's got 1,026 university credits. That's the equivalent of almost 20 master's degrees. And he's got that kind of intelligence. I just have kind of common sense and
Yeah.
some scientific knowledge. Okay.
But I mean, nonetheless, you've researched these in depth in 1,000 credits. So during my 20s, it took me. Well, I was an atheist for a little while, and like 5 years, and it took me 6 years to complete 120 credits. So,
Yeah, there you go.
and imagine 1,000 credits in much more intense fields of study. Huh?
Yes, yes. But yeah, so the three co-authors, the other one is Dr. Graham McLennan in Australia. Bergman is in Ohio.
Okay.
I'm in British Columbia, so we're kind of spread out. But we all like this idea of science to back up our creator, and who is incidentally the triune God of our Western nations. And we make quite a point of the fact that this concept of separation of church and state does not apply here because God is not the church. The church can be a group of people who are Satanists, cults, Mormons, Jehovah's Witnesses, Protestant, Catholic. It's a group of people or building, and that is not God. No church can make a living cell. Okay, no church can make a living cell. So the church and God are not the same. Don't confuse the two. It is good that the church can't tell the government what to do, and what the government can't tell the church what to do. That part of separation of church and state is a good idea, but don't confuse the church with God because they're not the same.
And one thing I think is important to really reflect on is these molecular machines that the smartest chemists have been able to create are nothing in any way compared to the complex molecular machine of one of our single cells.
Mhm.
I don't understand a ton about biology, but I understand enough to understand that,
Okay.
right? Like what precisely were they able to create again? Sorry if that's like repeating
They,
yourself. But,
it's an assembly of atoms that they can move with ultraviolet light. Basically, that's what
okay.
they've got. An assembly of atoms that they can move with ultraviolet light, okay, and guide it and run through this little race course that they have. But yeah, not anything like a living cell, which can have a living cell can have up to 40 different molecular machines. So that's another feature of our living cells that is so far away from what man can do. Probably the best lab in the world that can do a little part or two of a living cell is the J. Craig Venter lab. He did a lot of work on the genome project and still working in that area. He can copy a small part of a living cell and transplant it into another living cell, but he admits we're not creating life in the lab. Don't confuse us with that idea. So,
And then one of the testimonies I've highlighted on the channel previously, there was another. I'm not sure if he was an original researcher, but I know he's a biochemist. And one topic that he gets into is that in using our intelligence to show how cells could potentially be created, we're necessarily then showing that it requires intelligence to
absolutely.
create these machines and these cells
And not
that
not
we still
just
can't do.
yeah, not just regular intelligence, Caleb. It's got to be super intelligence. It's got to be far above mankind's level, far above mankind's level. So we aren't going to be doing that. And now we can make some robots, but they're nothing like a real human being.
And we are not robots, even though
No.
I mean the implication of naturalism would be that we're robots. There's a Hawking quote I like to throw out there in my discussions with atheists, where he says that it's hard to imagine how free will can exist if our thoughts and actions are purely the result of natural processes. So he thinks essentially naturalism means that we are machines, but there is so much within a human which makes it so obviously not the case that we are merely machines. Maybe a little off topic of the
That's,
conversation, but
that's right.
so for someone being introduced then to atomic biology,
Okay.
what is it?
Okay. So it's a level deeper than molecular biology. Okay. And when you go down to the atomic level where atoms, and this is for every cell, atoms that have to be found, like let's talk about living creatures like us.
Hmm?
It starts with elements in the dirt. Okay. So the right elements in the dirt have to be found, sorted, selected, counted, and precisely assembled to make every part of a carrot cell, for example. Okay. So it takes some water as well, so some H2O, but all the other elements, and for a human body, it takes about 60 different elements to complete a body, but they come from the dust, if you will, like the Bible says, and it takes a huge amount of physical work with atoms who are they're invisible. You can't see them; they're so small. But they have to be, like I say, they have to be found. The right ones have to be found, sorted, selected, and assembled precisely for every cell part, including the molecular machines, because plants or food items have um, molecular machines in all their cells as well. The cells in plants and foods are very similar to living cells in us. Okay, so it's basically the same material because that's what we're made out of. We're made out of the elements from the dirt by God taking our food, breaking it back down into atoms, shipping those atoms by our bloodstream out to every cell construction site, and then building the atoms, part by part, or building the cells part by part at the cell construction site. So it's a lot of work, and it is so much work, Caleb, that's another part that boggles my mind. And what switched me from a part-time curiosity as a new believer when I was 47 years of age to full-time researcher on this item of life and how we're made. It was the red blood cells that changed me from part-time to full-time.
Okay.
And I found from a fellow by the name of Pallister that he had taken a 150-pound male as a sample human being. He says that this 150-pound male needs about 2.3 million new red blood cells every second just to replace his worn out red blood cells, because they get to a point within 120 days roughly that they are no longer efficiently absorbing oxygen that we breathe in and dispelling the carbon dioxide. So they wear out, have to be replaced. So it takes about 2.3 million new red blood cells per second for a 150 pounder. Then a fellow by the name of Tortora says, well, every one of those red blood cells has about 280 million molecules of hemoglobin. Now, the American Red Cross says it's about 250 million molecules of hemoglobin, but let's not quibble.
Sure.
So then Max Perutz analyzed hemoglobin and said it takes almost 10,000 correct atoms to build every molecule of hemoglobin. Okay, now we do the math. Okay, so what is 2.3 million times, say, 250 million times 10,000? And now we're
A ton of zeros.
we say, as a general overall picture for all humanity, over 4,900 quadrillion correct atoms per second just to replace our red blood cells. And when I put that together, I thought, this has to go further because we don't read this anywhere. So that's what put me on this track, Caleb.
In quadrillion, 4,900 quadrillion. Whenever I looked at that in this book, which I'll put the title and everything all over the place whenever I upload this. But whenever I look at that number, I mean, quadrillion is it's so much greater than trillion, right? Trillion's not necessarily a number we can fathom, except that we know that our governments are in debt X amount of trillion of dollars. But quadrillion makes trillion. The comparison between quadrillion and trillion is like the comparison between trillion to a single digit. That's unimaginably large.
Yeah, goes up by 1,000. So a billion is 1,000 times a million. A trillion is 1,000 times a billion. A quadrillion is 1,000 times a trillion. And now we're talking 4,900 times a quadrillion.
4,900 trillion.
Yeah. Yeah. Now it's like sextillion, right? So yeah, it's in a second. This is in every second, 24 hours a day. So that's how much that's just one example of how much God cares for everybody, every second of every day. And if that ain't love, man, I don't know what is.
Every second, I mean, I might not remember this correctly. So every second, it's 4,900 quadrillion atoms
Yeah.
Help me with the order here. Collected, sorted. Run down that order for me one more time, because you run it through a few times in the book, and I want people to hear it more than once.
First of all, these atoms have to be found in our bloodstream, okay, which picked them up from our digestive system. So our bloodstream's going around, and blood is made mainly in our bones, and so blood cells. So yeah, so the atoms have to be, the correct atoms have to be found, sorted, selected, picking the right ones out from the wrong ones,
Okay.
and then precisely assembled. And the chemical formula for hemoglobin is fascinating, actually, because it's very precise down to, it's like 4,982 of nitrogen, for example, something like that. So I've got that formula here somewhere.
Hey,
Just
it's all right if you
incredibly.
say it. No one's going to remember it, most likely.
Yeah,
Uh, but so let's talk about like from a skeptic's perspective, right? A skeptic might say, what you're doing with all this is you're just saying God did it. That's a non-falsifiable hypothesis. How would you respond to that?
no, no. Atomic biology is falsifiable. Okay. All you have to do is build a carrot out of dirt. And if you can do that, you can falsify. Like if you can do it personally, you can falsify the atomic biology idea. Okay.
Yeah. There's a whole chapter on the falsifiability of the hypothesis in this textbook for those who should get this textbook.
Okay. So anyway, yeah, the what we say now, Caleb, is that atomic biology, basically, as performed by the creator, is verifiable. Okay, we can verify that it takes super intelligence, right? Because man doesn't have, we've already proven that man doesn't have enough intelligence to build a living cell. So it takes something far more intelligent than man. So that's why we call it super intelligence. So we can verify that it takes super intelligence to build living cells. And the fact that man has been trying to do this as human beings for over 70 years and can't come anywhere close, it's undeniable. The evidence is there. Evidence and facts do not lie. Now, some people lie about facts that aren't facts at all.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you picked up on Richard Lewontin's statement from Harvard. He's
go through that statement.
Okay. Yeah, because this is where problems come from, and we are now saying boldly that public enemy number one, Satan himself, has picked up on Darwinisms, okay, got it into our public school system to say that you don't need God because evolution is the origin and cause of life. So you don't need God, okay? So that is a major problem that has to change because it's false. Teachers that carry on being forced to teach evolution as the cause of life are being forced to lie to their students. So that's another point that we have to make. So here's Harvard professor Richard Lewontin, and these are his words. We take the side of evolutionary science, and I had to add the evolutionary because he just said we take the side of science. Well, it's not real science, it's evolutionary science. In spite of the patent absurdity of some of its constructs, He's talking about evolution here, right?
Mhm.
In spite of its failure to fulfill many of its extravagant promises of health and life, in spite of the tolerance of the scientific community for unsubstantiated, just so stories, because we have a prior commitment, a commitment to materialism. It is not that the methods and institutions of science somehow compel us to accept a material explanation of the phenomenal world, but on the contrary, that we are forced by our a priori adherence to material causes to create an apparatus of investigation and a set of concepts that produce material explanations, no matter how counterintuitive, no matter how mystifying to the uninitiated. Moreover, that materialism is absolute, for we cannot allow a divine foot in the door. We can't let God into science, is what they're trying to say. And God's the one that invented the sciences, does the work, and they're denying him, and they're getting away with it at the moment on a broad scale in our education system. That's got to stop. And I'm hoping that teachers, once they found out that this is a factually falsified theory and that teaching evolution as a cause of life is a lie, that they will say, I don't want to teach a lie anymore. So give me the truth.
Mm.
And I wanted to emphasize the importance of truth, okay? Because untruth is leading people so far astray.
You have, I don't know, maybe more faith in humanity than I might in that statement, because in that view, because I would just I would not necessarily say, even if the teachers do know, even of the teachers who do know, one, you mentioned one problem in the textbook about, and I know the textbook's not just you, but one problem is addressed where if someone is teaching science and they were to come out against Darwinism, then they could lose prestige, or they could be looked down upon, something of that nature. They might be more deeply questioned. But two, I do think, just as that quote portrayed, there is a religious clinging to like certain narratives that drive naturalism, like the beginning of the universe. The physicists, astronomers for a long time held to the view that the universe always existed in a steady state. And throughout the 1900s, while a ton of evidence was coming in that this was not the case, there was still plenty who would not go to the view that the universe had a beginning, because it was too much like Genesis 1:1.
Yeah, right. Too
Yeah.
much like the truth.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So
So,
maybe they will come around. God is sovereign over history, right? And you could be in Biology Institute. Sorry if I'm getting that wrong. Could certainly be part of shifting things in the right direction.
okay,
Maybe my outlook's too cynical for the faith that I hold. I'm not sure. Maybe I'll have to work on that.
okay. I was going to say this idea that they thought for some time that the universe always existed as it is, right? Until they found out that it's expanding at an incredible rate.
Mm-hmm.
So you take expansion in reverse, and what happens? Right? You come back to a central point somewhere.